All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Nicole Locke. I'm one of the assistant professors and a neonatologist at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. I'm here today as the TECaN Education Chair as part of the Job Search Series. This Job Search Series is starting this year with a specific talk on visas and how visas can affect the job search. We thank everybody who sent questions ahead of time, and we look forward to hearing from our speakers today. We will have a nice little didactic presentation first, and then we'll go to a Q&A with all of our panelists. Please ask yourself to keep yourself muted, and feel free to ask questions in the chat. So first, I want to introduce our didactic speakers. First, we have Vince Faustino. He is a pediatric critical care physician. He is currently at the Yale School of Medicine. He is from the Philippines. He did his medical school at the University of the Philippines College of Medicine, and his residency was in the Philippine General Hospital and Yale New Haven, and he continued on for his fellowship there and is currently working there. And then Shruti Gupta is our other didactic speaker today. She's from Connecticut. She did her medical school in India, her residency in Flushing Hospital, New York, her fellowship at Stony Brook, and is currently the medical director at Yale New Haven Health. You can see there her visa experience includes a J1 and then an H1, and she finally got a green card through the EB2 process. So I'm going to unshare and let them start their presentation.
You. Can you see my slides okay?
Yep, looks good.
All right. I just want to do a quick introduction about the shortage of primary care physicians, especially pediatricians, and just want to mention that IMGs make up 23% of the pediatric workforce, and out of that, 17% are on visas, which is why this presentation is important. Some definitions, which I think most people who are on this call probably already know since you are on a visa, but I just want to quickly mention that there are probably three kinds of visas that most people will be on. During their training, they would be on either a J1 visa, which is an exchange visitor visa, and has a maximum duration of really about 7 years, and you would need exceptions to go beyond that, and it's really meant for your training. H1 visa is an employment visa, which can go for a maximum of 6 years, and then the renewal is subjected to special conditions, really that you should be in your green card process by that time with an I-140 approved, which we would talk about a little bit later in the presentation. H1B visa is also subject to lottery, although most physicians will be exempt from it because non-for-profit hospitals are exempt from the lottery for H1 visa. O1 visa is another visa that is a non-immigrant visa meant for people with exceptional ability in their field. It's typically used after training for people sort of as like a placeholder between as they're trying to get to something or waiting for a spouse to finish a job or something like that, or working on research and stuff. It does not really lead to a green card process. So it's really not meant to be on, not something that you can be on forever. Waiver is is something that exempts an individual from specific immigration requirements. So if you are on a J1 visa, it's meant to be an exchange visitor where you're supposed to return to your home country after you have finished your training. The waiver can help you get exempted from that 2-year requirement to go back to your home country. Sponsorship involves an organization that's taking legal and financial responsibility for a foreign national's visa. This is just a little bit of a post-match visa application timeline for residency. Once you get matched to a residency, you can either go on a J1 visa or an H1 visa. Many people will go on a J1 visa, and ECFMG is the person is the entity that's sponsoring your J1 visa. Again, like I mentioned, it's meant to be for your training. Or you can go on an H1 visa at that point. In order to be eligible for an H1B right out of medical school, you have to take your step 3 before that, so that you have a medical license in that state, and then you can be on an H1B. There are some downsides to it. Many hospitals may not accept an H1B for fellowship, so some people will go on an H1B and then go back on a J1 if they want to do a fellowship. And the other thing is that H1 has a maximum duration of 6 years unless your green card process is started, which can be difficult if you're doing a 3-year residency and then a 3-year fellowship. Um, I'm going to focus more of this presentation on the J1 visa process. So this is just sort of a timeline that we talk about when you try to obtain a waiver. We do usually will recommend that the process for obtaining a waiver, job search, should be started like at least the summer before your 3rd year. So if you're doing a 3-year fellowship or a 3-year residency, you should start like at the end of your 2nd year. The first few months should really be discussing with your family what you are looking for regarding a location, private practice versus academic setting. Um, is the whole family relocating? This is extremely important because as many people may know, or as we go through the presentation, you'll know it can take many, many years for you to be getting through this process. So it's not something that's quick, and does involve a lot of times sacrificing one or the other. For me, for example, family, staying with my spouse was extremely important. He was on a J2 visa, and I had to give up my dream of working in an academic setting at that point, because most people tend to have to give up one or the other things that they're interested in as a result of this. And then it takes another 1 to 2 months for you should keep 1 to 2 months to like really broadening your job search. We will talk a little bit about the Conrad waiver, but it's really important for you to do your own homework and know which jobs are eligible for a J1 visa waiver. I have the link included in there to find out which is a medically underserved area. There is no benefit in interviewing at a place where they're not in a J1 visa waiver location, because you're just going to waste their time and your own time. So you will from time to time find people who are saying, oh, I can help you. I know the governor, I know this, that. It typically does not make any difference. So it's very important that you know if a particular job is in a medically underserved area or not. It's also important to negotiate and communicate compensation expectations. Going on a J1 waiver, we are sometimes so excited about it that we may feel that it's okay to just take a bad contract. At least I'm getting a J1 waiver, but that mentality can actually work really against you, because you could be stuck in this job for many, many years. It's not just the 3 years. It then takes once you complete your contract with a particular employer, it takes about 2 to 6 weeks to complete the online J1 visa waiver application. And then 2 to 3 months after that, you get into the Department of State review. Department of State has to see whether this job really rightfully falls into a medically underserved area. They check your home country's no objection policy, and they request a no objection certificate from your home country, which can sometimes be quite difficult to get depending on how organized your home country might be. And then it finally goes to the USCIS review, which can take up to 2 to 4 months, and they are the final authority, which will then grant a J1 waiver. And then after that, after getting a J1 waiver, you get on to an H1B, and that process also sometimes can take a few months to happen. So the entire timeline can take up to 18 months, so it's good to start early. The most common waiver that we talk about is the Conrad 30 waiver. So each state is allowed to give 30 waivers to physicians that are eligible. Many of them prefer to give it to primary care physicians rather than specialized physicians, but that's state dependent. Since the number is only 30, depending on the size of the state, it can be almost impossible to get that Conrad 30 waiver. Connecticut being a small state, slightly easier to get, which is why I was able to do my waiver in Connecticut. But in New York, there are like many, many applicants that are going for the Conrad 30 waiver. So knowing your state is important. It's also important to know what the cutoffs are for applications. Many states go through a lottery system, so they will accept all the applications for Conrad 30 and then just pick up 30 applications via lottery. And many of these lotteries can be like in the October of your third year. So if you don't have a job by October, you're not really eligible for the Conrad 30. So you should know your state's cutoffs. This is the link that I've placed here for the HRSA.gov, where you can actually find whether a particular practice or a hospital qualifies for a J1 waiver job or not. This is the next kind of waiver. This is an Appalachian or ARC waiver. There have been some newer waivers that have come out in the last few years. This particular waiver is limited to the specific counties in the Appalachian area. Although designed for primary care physicians, specialists are sometimes accepted in this waiver. You can obtain more information on the website link that's linked here. And these sometimes can be a little bit easier to get than Conrad 30 because they're not the number itself is not limited. The next one is the Delta Regional Authority waiver. This is limited to the states in the Mississippi River Basin. Both primary care and specialists are accepted for this. Again, the website is there. The DRA website is something that can give you information. The physician must, again, work full-time at a site in a health professional shortage area or a mental health professional shortage area. And the last one, which is the newest one, is the Southeast Crescent Regional Commission waiver. And this is meant for the states in the Southeastern United States. This waiver is actually quite favorable for subspecialists. So, I think many people on this call are neonatologists, and so it would work for neonatologists quite well and has actually become a very popular waiver in the last year or so. And again, the website is listed there. Once you get a waiver, things are not over, and a lot of us get very excited once we get a waiver. In fact, journey, especially for citizens of certain countries, can really begin from here. So once you get your J1 waiver, it gets you to a conditional H1B, which means that you must complete 3 years of working in that particular job. You have to follow strict conditions that are listed for that job, meaning you have to work full-time for 40 hours a week at least. And then once you complete that, you can start your green card process. Starting the green card process means that you can go through multiple routes, either EB1, EB2, or EB3. And then depending on the country of birth, this can have a huge backlog. And I'm going to show you a slide with backlogs for certain countries. And so backlog for certain countries can be decades long. It's really important to start building your CV during your trainee years for an eventual EB1, especially if you are born, especially in India, China, where there's a lot of backlog. So just to go quickly over the stages of green card process, which are employment based. So once you're on a non-immigrant status, in this case, we would all be on an H1B after you've completed your J1 waiver. You file for your perm labor certification. This is assuming you're doing EB2 or EB3. If you're doing EB1, the employer does not need to do anything. That is a self-petition. If the employer is filing for you, they have to have a recruitment period. They have to show that they could not find a US citizen for this particular job, and that's how you become become eligible for it. Once you've met all of those requirements and I-140 is filed, I-140 can be expedited, but can typically take 6 months to a year to get. Once you have an I-140 approval, you can then renew your H-1 and conditionally, essentially, as long as you have a job, you can renew it for every year, every 3 years or so. But you must reach the I-140 stage in order to renew your H-1B. After I-140, when your country's final action date becomes current, then you file I-485. That's the adjustment of status for green card. That's the final step where you get a work permit and an advance parole to travel, and then ultimately you receive green card. The backlog for certain countries, especially for India, between I-140 and I-485 step can be decades long, and that's where you kind of get stuck. So this is the chart. This is a visa bulletin from March 2025. There's a visa bulletin that's published every month. Once you get on this track, you're going to be tracking this like literally every month. And as you can see, for especially for Indian citizens, EB1, which I'm going to talk about a little bit, which is a visa of very hard to get. I mean, or a process that's very hard to follow, but um, if it gets approved for Indian citizens, even that has a backlog. And right now, people who have filed in February of 2022 are the ones who can actually get the green card. For EB2 and EB3, as you can see, for Indian citizens, that's December 2012, and EB3 is February 2013. And we're in 2025 right now. And this line moves really slowly. This does not mean that you can get, if you were to file today, in 13 years, you would be able to get your green card. It can actually take multiples of that. So what is an EB1? You must demonstrate extraordinary ability in order to be able to be eligible for EB1. You have to meet at least 3 out of the 10 criteria, or evidence of one-time achievement like a Nobel Prize or something. Otherwise, you must meet the 3 criteria. And USCIS is very particular about the 3 criteria. And you really cannot, be wishy-washy about it. So if you have original published articles that satisfies one criteria only, evidence of being asked to judge work of others like peer review. So that's why getting onto journal reviews is very important and can be helpful. Evidence of published material about you in professional publications. So just like a little newspaper is not really going to help. Evidence of membership in associations in the field which demand outstanding achievement of members, and so forth. So there's a lot of these criterias, and you must fulfill at least 3 criteria in order to get this application done. This can be easy if you really work on it from the beginning of your training and really focus on and keep everything in order in a file. So multiple challenges for people on J1 visa, especially finding the waiver job is just one of the challenges. Relocation and staying away from family for many years, unable to change job for many years. So if you're lucky and you find a job that you really like, then it doesn't matter. But otherwise, it can be quite difficult. There can be workplace discrimination as a result because they know that you cannot leave this job. Your career trajectory can get changed. For me, it definitely had gotten changed. It can be an extremely expensive process every time you renew your H1, every time you'd go through the J1 process, and you're paying lawyers a lot of money. A lot of travel restrictions. Your visa must be stamped on your passport in order to leave the border, which sometimes can be difficult, and COVID definitely was very distressing for many of us. Unable to take family leaves, breaks. You can't just say that, okay, I have a child, I want to take a 6-month. You cannot do that. You have to be working in order to stay in the country. Fear of family deportation in case of disability and death. This is something that should never be discounted. We all think that everything is going to be perfect, and there have been many families that have had to leave the country because their spouse passed away or something happened and they were relying on that visa. I just want to put one little caution in there from the ECFMG memo. This comes up quite often. J1 physicians are not allowed to moonlight, and it is a clear violation of the J1 visa. So, we really encourage not to be doing that because it can really come to bite you in the long run. And even though it can be really tempting as a trainee to want to moonlight, but you should not because you're not allowed to. So this is just last slide for my career trajectory. I started my residency in 2002, finished in 2005 when I started my fellowship. And then I was very excited that I obtained a J1 waiver job in Connecticut. Even though it was not an academic institution, it was a small level 3, but it was still, I consider myself lucky. I did something called an NIH waiver at that point. So working in the underserved area and the same job for 5 years can actually get you onto an NIH waiver, and you can actually sort of expedite your EB process. However, it used to get you to an EB1 process, but in 2012, when I obtained the NIH waiver, USCIS decided that that was no longer going to be true, and it became an EB2 category. So I ended up having 2 EB2 approvals, but still had to wait for my country's backlog to get relieved. So in 2021, when that happened, I was able to join Yale and then finally got my green card in 2022. And now for Dr. Faustino to talk about pursuing the research career as an IMG.
Thanks, Shruti. Physician scientist career is something that most IMGs don't really think about just because of all the issues that goes with it. But I can tell you it's doable. It's definitely not easy, but it's doable. Shruti, next slide, please. Okay, so the caveat to my next couple of slides is this is for non-US citizen IMG on a non-immigrant visa, particularly J1 visa. I think most of you guys are in J1 because the rules for age are slightly different. Next slide, please. Okay, so for as fellows, we don't really talk about the NIH alphabet soup, but you may have heard some of this stuff. So the Fs, the Ks, the Rs, and the Ts, and sometimes the Ps. I would assume that our participants right now are in the postdoctoral residency phase and then going into the early career phase. So at this point in time, sort of the available NIH grants are the Ts, so the T32, and then as you move on as a junior faculty, you are looking at most likely a K23, which is for clinical research, or a KO8, which is for basic science research. Unfortunately, all the grants that I mentioned to you are not available for those on a non-immigrant visa. So if you're in a J, you're in H, you're not eligible for it. However, there's a special one that's a K99 ROO, which is probably the only one that's available for those who are on a non-immigrant visa. Shruti, next slide, please. So the requirements for those NIH grants are you need to be a US citizen or permanent resident and at least 75 protected research time, which all of us don't have at that point of their career. So what are the options if you want to pursue a physician scientist career? Next slide, please. Shruti, next slide, please. Please talk. Okay. Okay. So here are the options. So because at this point, well, we didn't have no permanent residency. So I mentioned earlier the K99 ROO. So that is the only career development award, NIH Career Development Award, that does not require at least a permanent residency. But that award, that you need to apply within 4 years of your last training. So for fellows, your terminal degree is considered your fellowship, so you actually have 4 years to do that. If you are that good, you can actually go straight to an R series, like an R01, R03, R21. Clearly, that's difficult, but it's an option. I've seen people do that. Foundation grants. Most of these grants do not need US citizenship, and then clearly local grants. So those are the options. The issue is you actually, so even if you have these options for funding, you actually need time to do them. So if you're on a waiver, you're required at, well, 40 hours on paper, like 40 hours of clinical work. So what are the options if you want to pursue research as an IMG? So there's the O visa. So the O visa does not require you to, a certain number of clinical hours, so you can actually go on full-time research under the O visa. Most of us do work above our clinical hours, right? Because if you're really passionate about what your science is, then you just make do with what you have, and more often than not, it's working nights, weekends, just to be able to do what you want to do. And then the local grants. Local grants don't usually require protected research time, so you can actually use that. I can tell you that between lab-based research, and then clinical research is more conducive to for IMGs, because even if you're doing 40 hours clinical time, you can actually do your research on the side. In contrast to bench research or lab research, where you actually need to get out of your clinical space, and that's more difficult. Next slide, please. So this was my journey. So I came to the US in 2003 on the J1 visa. The research that I did was part of my fellowship, right? So funding isn't really an issue, like I had to do it. I did fellowship and then residency after, and then I finished in 2008. I got a Conrad waiver. So I was on H-1B visa, but as I mentioned before, I'm not eligible for any of the career development awards. So I got some funding from Yale, which is internal. And then the other thing that you may want to pursue is, even though NIH would not fund career development awards, and it's very difficult to get your independent funding, you can actually be site PIs on NIH studies, so that you can, continue to network, do the research that you want to do, and, sort of build your portfolio. In 2011, I got my permanent residency. So I'm married to a US citizen. That's why I had 3 years, and then I can get my green card. And then that's when I got NIH Career Development Award, and then foundation grants. And then 2014, I got my citizenship, and my funding is foundation from American Heart and Griffiths, and then NIH. Next slide, please, Shruti. So as I mentioned earlier, it's all about perspective, right? If you really are passionate with what you're doing, you just deal with it and then go on with it, right? So this is just one figure that we always see, the small part that what people see as success, but there's so much things that's going on underneath. And it's not any different for a physician scientist, whether you're an IMG or non-IMG, except that perhaps it's actually much harder for us non-IMGs, because we don't have the NIH as a fallback during the first couple of years of our career. I think that's all I have. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for that presentation. I think it was really helpful to give everybody an idea of either your journeys and kind of the difficulties that people face, and the different opportunities and options that are available. I next want to share my screen and talk with, present our additional panelists who are here to answer all of our questions. So first, to add here is Darren Bodkin. He is from Trinidad and Tobago. He did his medical school in the West Indies. His residency was at SUNY Brooklyn. He did his fellowship at the University of Pittsburgh. and Magee Women's Hospital, and he's currently an attending neonatologist at Oklahoma Children's Hospital, U Health. For his visa experience, he was previously on a J-1 visa through residency and fellowship, and he's now on a H-1B visa. Next, we have Saurabh Patel. He is originally from India. He did his medical school at MS University in Vadodara. He did his residency at St. Peter's University Hospital, his fellowship at the University of Illinois, and he stayed on and is an attending neonatologist at Illinois. Preeti Singh is also from India. She did her medical school at Lady Harding Medical College. Her residency was in Texas at Texas Tech. Her fellowship was at UC Irving in California, and she was on a J-1 visa at that time. Her current job is she is a medical director in Georgia. She previously worked in Mississippi on a J-1 waiver. And then finally, we have Melis Suner. She's from Turkey. She did her medical school at Istanbul. Her residency was done on a J-1 visa at Bronx Care Health System. Her fellowship was at the TECaN School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, also on a J-1 visa, and she is currently an attending neonatologist at Bronx Care Health System on an O-1 visa. So thanks everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate it. See if I can change my view a little bit for everybody. Okay. Again, please ask any questions. If you'd like to speak, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask questions live, or I'll look at the chat. We have many questions actually that were sent ahead of time. So I wanted to start with those and just see if everybody would be able to our speakers already talked about their path. If our other panelists wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about the path they had to take throughout their medical training.
I can go if everybody's okay. So, hi everyone. My name is Saurabh Patel. As Nicole mentioned, I did my residency from Jersey, and then I did my fellowship in Chicago. I'm thanking Dr. Gupta and also Dr. Faustino for their wonderful presentation for the J1, and I think that covers a lot of things for everybody. Few things which I think particularly pertinent to people who are on H1 would be important for them to know, or which kind of was helpful for me when I was running into tight spot when after finishing my fellowship, was that you finish your 6 years of fellowship and your 6 years of H1B, and then you don't have a wiggle room to kind of play around. So one of the things which actually helped me was during my residency and a fellowship, I traveled a lot back to India to see my family and my parents. So something is called recapture time. So whatever amount of time you spend during those 6 years outside of US, it doesn't need to be in your parent country. It has to be outside of US boundaries. That those all days can be recaptured back and would be added back as a second layer to your 6th year. So technically you are completing total 6 years, not as in calendar 6 years, if I may just loosely put it. And that helped me a lot to bridge another 4 months to get my additional H1B. And from that point onwards, because while I was looking for a job, I applied for my EB2, and it was still in a process. So it was becoming very tight for me to kind of navigate it. Unfortunately, what happened was as soon as I finished that 3 years, or within that 3 to 4 months of window, my first EB2 got rejected. So at that time I learned that there are some states which allows your training to be considered in what is called you have served in underserved area, and what they look for is total 5 years of duration. So my residency was considered, my fellowship was considered as an underserved area, and my employment was at the same location. So both of them combined together, my employer was willing to write a letter for 2 years saying that they will employ me for 2 years. This is different than a J1 waiver, so you don't need to get a state approval. All you need is to get a letter from your employer, and then they will send that letter to your state health department confirming that your area or location where you are working is still designated as an underserved, medically underserved area. So once they have those two letters, then pretty much they give you the waiver for the H1B lottery system. And that's how I was able to get my second EB1 going. And that was helpful for me to bridge it. So I think that is another thing to kind of keep in mind. Based on the hard lessons I learned, I would say that if you have an option to apply for EB2, one is kind of considered self-petition because you're applying based on your merit, I would say, and second one is based on your work in underserved area. I would say that don't look at the money. As a neo, you will make good amount of money. If not, then once you start your job, you can do some moonlighting and recover your money, but please apply both of them because those two things would be handy. The one which you are working with your employer for underserved area, that's called HIPSA. That is kind of short, so that's always works in your favor. The flip side is if you want to leave your location within that stipulated 5 years, then that becomes an issue. So that's why you want to have a second one. And depending on when you are filing, um, depending on and when you are getting a job, if you applied your EB2 self-petition prior hand, and if that also gets approved, your priority date moves ahead. So I think always make sure that if you have a chance to apply for multiple one, you can do that. Another thing which was important was, as I think they have mentioned, Dr. Gupta and Dr. Faustino, is that O visa. So your another option, and that was one of the questions from the viewers, that if you have if you have a means to convert yourself to O visa, that becomes a bridge, and that is totally fine. You can use that. Unfortunately, for H1, it's like once you have done 6 years, you cannot go back on H1 without getting your 140 approved or kind of have an approval or in process. So once you are an O1, you can build up your whole CV or a profile, make sure that you apply for H1 again, make sure you apply for I-140 approval and everything. And once you have an approval, you can transition back to your H1. The other thing is if your spouse is working and if your spouse has H1B and also has 140 approved, think about switching it back to their dependent visa and H4 and get a work permit EAD, and then through that you can still continue your employment. So that's another option. Majority of times it wouldn't apply, but I think whoever it can apply to, they can use it. The other categories, if you are thinking about O1, then kind of the application for a O and a EB1 is similar depending on which institution lawyer you talk to. My institution lawyers were in a favor of saying that they both are same. So they were like, if I'm applying for your O, I might as well apply for your EB1. So talk to your institutional lawyers. If they are willing to apply for your O, then always ask them to also simultaneously apply for EB1. Sometimes they might say yes, sometimes they might say no. If it just comes to the point where some of the cost they have to ask you to sponsor, then that's totally fine. And that I'm talking to you particularly about 485 related cost. Otherwise, they cannot ask you to sponsor any cost. So if you are in that situation, then always look for the employer based EB1 application, which is also possible. So I think those are the options to consider for somebody who is in that situation.
Hey everyone, my name is Darren, and I wanted to add, I do agree as well that Dr. Gupta and Dr. Faustino, the timeline you had was very, very, very helpful. But I just wanted to add that during my job search, I did look at the academic and private neonatology groups, hospitals, because there was a question about cold emailing chiefs. And just that you are aware, yes, you definitely want to use that website that Dr. Gupta put out because it does give you the health shortage areas by rank, and you could definitely, I mean, once you've kind of done this enough, you kind of guess geographically where would be higher. But if you want to create the Excel sheet with the list, that website does help you. And then, well, you know that you could go to that children's hospital or just general hospital website and email the division chief. But a lot of the private practice groups as well, some academic centers have their own internal recruiters. Um, and in fact, Dr. Gupta and Pastor, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think even Yale as an academic center has a dual, they have a recruiter and a division chief, because I remember looking at their list too. So the point is, don't think that you have to be limited to an academic center. There are the pediatrics and mednaxes of the world that have hospitals in these locations that will be hiring. And the important question for someone who asked about the red flags, I learned a very important red flag that can happen is if you have your first conversation with a division chief and you need to be clear about their experience with the process and the in-house ability to facilitate that. So I was able to kind of put a center, which I'll not name, off the list really, because they had no idea. The division chief had no idea about J1 waiver process. It seemed like a new term for that person, and they said they'll check with their people and let me know, and they still were very request. So just be aware of that.
Hi, I can talk a little bit about my experience. Since Ovan was also mentioned as well, I am originally from Turkey, and I came initially here to United States in 2015 to do postdoctoral fellowship, just research. And that's why I started on a J1 visa. And through my residency, through my fellowship, I continued on that. And at the end of fellowship, I had to face the reality that now I had to find a waiver job. And like Dr. Gupta mentioned, you can't have everything. And I had to make limitations due to my family that we have to stay around New York. And my previous residency NICU chief reached out to me knowing I was on a J1, as Bronx Care is an underserved area that they will sponsor the waiver. So I applied for Conrad 30 through New York State, through Bronx Care Hospital. And every Conrad 30 waiver application has a deadline. I found the job in July, applied in December by the deadline. And in May, like a month before I graduated through fellowship, I learned that New York State didn't grant me the waiver. So come like a month before my graduation, I learned that I was out of a visa. So my option was I quickly converted to an O1 pathways. I talked to many lawyers, and unfortunately through this process, talking to immigration lawyer is one of the hardest things to do. You don't know which lawyer to go to. There are many lawyers that ask for a lot of money just to do a consultation, and they end up the consultation without even helping you or just making you cry, as if this was a impossible situation. But it's not. I found lawyers that were really experienced in O1, like physician J1 to O1 transition. And like many of you said, O1 criteria is very similar to EB1, and United States at this time is really helpful to physicians to make sure that they are getting O1. So O1, getting an O1 as a physician, it's not impossible. It's very easy. We actually check many of the criteria that they require. Of course, we don't have a Nobel Prize, we don't have things, but we have shown that we are really extraordinary in the jobs that we do. So it took me like 2 months to prepare the application. It was a really thick folder that I prepared and a lot of money that I spent. And then I was able to get the O1 and come back to United States around October to start the job. Again, I had sacrificed my initial hopes to work in a level 4 more academic center, and I've chosen this like underserved area. And then even that didn't grant me the waiver. So it's really important if you are going for a waiver to understand which I didn't at the time, the chances that you'll get it, which like the state that you are applying in, how many people usually get it, what's the percentage of success. O1 is a really easy transition, but it still does not grant me permanent residency. At one point, I'll still need to get the waiver, which I'm at this time hoping to do through hardship.
Hello, everyone. I'm Preeti Singh. Wow, that was a great presentation by Dr. Gupta and Dr. Faustino, and great tips that were shared by Dr. Patel and Dr. Botkin and Dr. Saner. I don't know how much more I can add, but I will try. So I kind of went through the same thing. I started my residency on a J1, and I wanted to do neonatology fellowship. There's an option to do pediatrics kind of waiver because it's easier to find the general, physician, general peds waivers are easier to find than neonatology and subspecialist waiver. But I didn't want to do that, take a break from, to work and then go back to fellowship. I thought that would be harder. So I decided to do fellowship, but that made it a little harder because I ended up in California for fellowship, which after my training, I realized California actually does not support the subspecialist waiver, especially with the Conrad. And there are no other options really other than Conrad on the West Coast. So I had to kind of decide whether I do the pediatrics waiver if I wanted to stay in California or look for other states. So it's very important for you to figure out what is, if geographical location is really important for you, and that can help you kind of navigate which waivers are available and if there are restrictions on those waiver programs for subspecialists. So I ended up accepting this waiver position in Mississippi, so all the way from California to Mississippi. But it was good. I think some of the obstacles that I ran into was how to find those positions. Sometimes it's kind of really hard because they don't advertise if they're going to sponsor J1, they're going to sponsor any visa at all. So again, sending the cold emails, as Dr. Botkin mentioned, it's kind of hard to do that as well. So I I actually work for pediatrics, so I went through their website. Actually, pediatrics website is really good. They do kind of mention if they sponsor J1 waiver or J1 visas for certain kind of job categories or locations, and that was really helpful. And reached out to those recruiters, and those recruiters are also helpful in terms of finding other J1 kind of locations under their area of work, and then they can also connect you to other recruiters within that company. So that was one thing that was helpful. Other thing I would kind of recommend is just reconnecting with your older fellows, the fellows who have graduated, who were on J1, to kind of see where they are. You can get that information from the program director and kind of reach back out to them. It's kind of feels awkward if you have never met them, but I would be happy to help anyone who would send me a text or email about J1 waiver. I get super excited. I'm like, yeah, I can help you, at least share some information from my journey. So don't hesitate to reach out. And the other thing is meet people in the conferences. When you meet people in conferences, talk about the visa, and you will be surprised. People will tell you, hey, I'm in this program, here's my contact information, contact me, and things like that. I would also say being part of some of these J1 waiver, the groups on Facebook. If you are a social media person, then there are also kind of a lot of good information on those websites as well in terms of the J1 waiver kind of timelines, how other people are doing that are kind of at the same timeline with you, maybe the same state. Also the green card kind of applications and the process. I wish I knew the green card process earlier, but I think Dr. Gupta and Dr. Patel kind of shared some of the insight. Start early. You have to really plan in today's world, and things are changing so much and so fast in immigration that it's very important to start early and kind of get your EB green card application or petition approved in any category you can get. as soon as possible to get that priority date as soon as possible. And I figured if you do, as Dr. Patel mentioned, the NIW, and I think Dr. Gupta mentioned as well, that's the National Interest Waiver. It's still EB2, but it's a self-petition. And you can actually start that application as soon as you sign the contract. You don't even have to wait for you to start the job. So the only caveat to that is you have to have a 5-year requirement of working in a medically underserved area, which you don't have to complete if you eventually decide to go to EB1 route or EB2 through your employer and not NIW, if you decide to leave after 3 years and not complete 5 years. But that is an option to at least have your priority date locked as early as possible. Because if you do the employer-based EB2, that takes longer time to do labor certification. And your employer might say, oh, we're not going to even start the process until you're at least 6 months or year into the job. And the reason why I did EB to NIW for my husband, he was my dependent. He is engineer, and if I did not do that NIW, then he would not have the H4 EAD, and then he would not be able to work for the entire time. I would have to wait for my employer to file the labor certification and get through that route. So that's the reason why I had to kind of do NIW, but I'm glad I did that. So I had a little bit sooner priority date. And then currently I'm kind of working on EB1, just getting the stuff together. I'm in private practice, so that kind of makes it a little harder, but it's definitely possible. Again, starting early, and when you're in, especially in the fellowship, and get your CV really kind of build up by doing presentations and publications and, just doing the work and getting, adding to your CV. It can be very helpful. Again, having an immigration lawyer, I would say, is another kind of a good support, because there are a lot of things that, you read on forums, you may not understand. Your situation may be unique and kind of different from other people. So having an immigration lawyer that you can rely on for anything and everything is also helpful. In the beginning, I would always meet an immigration lawyer when I would go for when I was looking for a job. So any interview I would go for, I always kind of ask them that I would like to meet with your immigration lawyer, because I wanted to know what they are capable of, what they have done in the past, if they have done the J1 waiver in the past or other waivers in the past, what has their experience been. And the place I chose to work, they actually did a J1 waiver under DRA just a couple of years before me. So I knew they just had recently done this, and my process were very seamless. I really don't even know what all they did. Whatever they asked, I gave them, they filed, and till date, I don't know. And I kept the same immigration lawyer from Mississippi, and I can ask him questions for travel, for finding new job, for H-1B transfers. I did H-1B transfer from Mississippi and Georgia, and the process was really seamless. But again, having an immigration lawyer is very, very important to have one that you can rely on. And what else? I guess that's those are the key points that I could share for my journey. Thank you. Thank you all.
Wow, thank everybody so much for sharing. I think all of the stories were a little different, but each had, something to add. So I really thank everybody for taking the time to share those. I got a couple questions in the chat to first ask, and I know that we've already kind of talked about these, but just to make sure that we discuss them. We talked about where some underserved areas are, which may be a place, and a couple of you mentioned about different options for where to look for jobs, but is there any job posting list anywhere, somebody asked?
So as I mentioned, Pediatrics has a career website that does post jobs. You can kind of narrow it down by different states, and each position, when you click on it, somewhere in the write-up it says if it's eligible for a visa. Most of the time that's J1 or H1. or you can contact the recruiter and ask them directly. But again, it depends on the location, what state you're kind of preferring, or actually which area of the country. If it's kind of West Coast, then it's mostly Conrad. And I think there are websites where you can find the HPSA website. You can go there, HHS website, I believe. You can go there and find, like, put specific zip codes, and then kind of see if they come under that medically. There is a medically underserved area, and then there is the health professional shortage areas. And there are different waiver programs that kind of go by either MUA or HPSA areas. But I guess there is not kind of one specific place to find that. I mean, you have to narrow down a few things to be able to kind of navigate that.
Yeah, you could go on like something like neonatology.org, and if you find the job postings there, then you go in and plug that in into these websites to kind of get an idea of like whether this qualifies or not. You know, many academic centers will qualify, but you have to check for private practices and other smaller practices. And if there is a recruiter number, like Preeti mentioned, if there is a recruiter involved, then they will typically know whether it's qualifies or not. Um, but sometimes you do have to find a job first and then go in and see whether it's applicable or not. And one thing I just wanted to quickly add is that a big mistake many people do is not review their file completely when the lawyer is actually sending it out. It's extremely important to do that. There are so many mistakes that lawyers do, even if you worked with them for years and years and you're like, what, how could they do that? They can do that. So it's just really important, because you just have to make one mistake and your entire journey can just go away.
Thank you for that. Do you guys know of any resources to help, you know, people with that process, or knowing about kind of the paperwork? Is it mostly just social media groups or things like that? Just a shout out that TECaN does have a Signal group that's specifically focused on visas that I would encourage everybody to join as just a different resource. But I know there's lots of others out there.
I think there's a J1 visa waiver group on Facebook that I'm part of. Sometimes there are good conversations, or you can even ask your question and someone might have a situation like you and they might be able to share some insights. And then there is one for EB1 backlog or EB1 green card kind of process kind of group, and people share their journeys of getting EB1 approved, and lawyers that they recommend, and kind of some other tips and different situations. So that can be helpful.
The websites that I listed under each waiver, those websites are very good about like learning about those specific waivers. And also I used to do this, like read a lot of like the immigration lawyers' websites, so you don't have to consult them, but if you go on their websites, they will actually have a lot of helpful information that you can first learn about and then go to the lawyer. You don't want to go there without knowing anything, and then you waste your money.
Based on what Dr. Gupta said, I remember I'm not trying to advocate anybody, but I used to follow kind of a podcast. It is not a podcast, but kind of a series by Reddy and Newman, and they were pretty good in terms of at least providing you the basic information about what the law is and how you interpret it, and where you can get fixed into that and how to navigate those situations. So I think that was helpful. The other one is on the line of that's Conrad 30. There is a very active physician group. They were working to pass couple of legislative actions through the system. The group is called PAHA, PAHA. So I think they are very active on a Facebook. They are also active on the WhatsApp group. So you can join them, and they do provide a lot of support for all sorts of activities in your or they have a lot of groups. So you can either be part of the EB1 group, you can be part of the EB2 group, you can be part of a job search group, and you can find a lot of connections from there. They also have good lawyers, because those lawyers were helping them to work on our legislative activities. So you can utilize those lawyers also for the fee. So I think that also is a good resource if you want to utilize that, and that's for free.
My experience has been similar, that I had to read through multiple resources to get an understanding. And even for Conrad 30, every state has different requirements, and every state has different application deadlines when they will reveal the results. So just reading through the Conrad 30 in general is not enough. You have to go through whichever state you are applying to make sure that you are not missing anything.
I would like to mention one more thing. Like if you are going through the Conrad, because the timeline is so long that you won't know the result until kind of very end, that it may not leave you very much time to apply for another waiver, because you cannot apply for two waivers at the same time. It has to be only one waiver application that can be active at one time, especially under Conrad. So have a backup plan. So as Dr. Sunir mentioned, Owen is a good kind of transitional year, so you can buy more time to apply for a waiver the following year. And also look at some federal waiver programs like the Delta Regional or Appalachian Regional Commission, or the SCRC that Dr. Gupta mentioned, the NHHS, and there is also National Border Regional Commission. So those are some of the federal programs which are open all year, and you can apply whenever. And the timeline is still going to be long, but at least there is no kind of deadlines of when to apply and when the application closes. It kind of rolls year round. So those could be your kind of backup plans, but you can't do two at the same time.
Thank you guys for that. I don't want you guys to get into too specifics if that's too personal, but some people have asked, you know, how much financially do they need to be saving for this process? Because they know that especially getting lawyers involved will cost a lot. So what do they need to be prepared for?
It really depends on how long your journey is going to be. Technically, every time your H1 is renewed or your J1, the institution that is required to pay. So actually, you know, when I first came to the US, that was not the law, and we used to spend a lot more money. Now, if you are working with the right kind of institutions, they are paying a lot for a lot of those things, but you would self-pay for like something like EB1 application, which, you know, can range from $5,000 to $10,000. So it really depends on how long your journey stays. For me, my journey was extremely long, and partly because of the mistakes that I made early on. I should have applied for things much earlier than I did. So it ended up being expensive, but it really depends. For some people, I know some of our fellows who ended up doing it with zero cost, because you are required to use the institution's lawyer. So if you're staying with just the institutional stuff, you may not pay anything.
I agree, like what Dr. Gupta said. I think your situation kind of dictates the total cost, because some institutions would be like, I will sponsor your primary H1, but I would not do the premium processing. Or I would do your premium process, or I would just do H1. And then if you're applying for your spouse, then you need to bear all the costs for your spouse and the kids. So if you consider everything as any single expense you are making towards the immigration, and you have your green card in your hand over a period of 10 to 15 years, I think your cost over that 10 to 15 years would go to somewhere around 50 to 60K plus, right? But the question is, are you going to spend every single one of that dollar right at that time? No. Your biggest expense would come is when you are applying for your I-140 approval. If you are self-petitioning, your cost would go up. If you are employer petition, then your cost would go down. And your second biggest cost would come in is when you are applying for your adjustment of status as 485. I think those two are the biggest cost. Remaining parts you will bleed constantly at a certain rate, and you'll not even realize that. But yeah, those are the two things you just need to remember, and those are the two big costs where you need to save up a good amount of chunk.
And you need to know, sorry, I was going to say, you need to know where premium processing is useful for you, where it's not. So for example, for Indian citizens with a backlog, it doesn't help to do premium processing for your I-140 unless you're waiting for your H-1 renewal based on that, because you're going to be stuck for years anyway in the line, so it's fine. So you need to know, like, where to use the money.
Yeah, and if you want to save your money and if you are staying at the same place, please apply in advance for your H1 renewal, because they can apply, your employer can apply with just 2 years of job done. So you have your H1 file pending. And majority of times I ended up asking my employer to do premium processing for H1 was purely because my license is tagged to the H1 expiry. So if I need to go anywhere, then I'm kind of stuck, even for my job. So I just told them that, you know what, this is my reason why I need a premium processing. And they considered that as a valid expense. So they waived that and they did not say that I have to pay for a premium processing. So just have to find out and argue in a right way. And sometimes they will agree to that, and that's totally fine. Also, I used to apply like 1 year in advance. So my employer was also totally fine. So I always used to tell them that apply earlier, because I'm staying here in my employer also doesn't have a problem. So my institution doesn't have a problem. So that way everything is in line. And then when you apply, you don't have to apply for premium processing when you have 2 or 3 months left and you still don't have a green card, your H1 in your hand. Then at that time you can escalate and convert that to premium processing. So that would become easier, and your employer also sees that you're not wasting their resources. So I think you have to be considerate about what your employer is doing for you, but at the same time you need to make sure that what is best in your interest and then go with that.
Because you can include it as part of your negotiation package. So most packages would include the relocation fee or whatever. But if you're staying in the same place, then there's no relocation to think about. Then you can use that money for your visa. That's what I did for mine.
And what Dr. Faustino mentioned, every institution has their own policy. So some institutions would allow you to bring in your lawyer who can work with the institution and can apply for institutional based applications. And some institutions are code like, nope, it's my application. We will not even allow you to see the application. You just provide us the document and the rest of the things we will do it. So I think that is another version. So you need to see what your institution is doing, and always, like what he mentioned, negotiate with your employer that these are your needs and how much of that is being covered. So that way it's helpful.
Because there's a vested interest in the institution to get your waiver, right? Because they need you to work. So the faster that can happen, the better off for the institution, because they already spent all this money trying to recruit you. It's just gonna be wasted money if they cannot bring you in. So that's actually one of your negotiating points, right? It's like, well, you need me to work, you need to help me get that waiver or that visa.
Right. It's very important to ask for your needs, because if you don't ask, the answer is going to be no. So as Dr. Bodkin mentioned, that they need you as much as we need them. So it's okay to ask and put it in a way that it makes sense. And most of the times the employers will work with you. I was able to negotiate a couple of things on my contract, which is not a routine for pediatrics, which has kind of nationwide staffing company, and they're like, oh, our contracts are pretty standard. I'm like, yeah, I understand, but can we do this? So they were able to kind of modify a couple of things, but if you don't ask, then the answer is no. And then you can also have a contract lawyer that can review the contracts for you, and kind of the contracts are mainly to protect the employers, not to protect the employees. But still, they can go through the language, because sometimes it's hard to understand the language in those contracts. So it's important you understand what's in the contract if the situation arises. And the contract lawyers can help you review the contract. And there are also some contract lawyers who can also help negotiate your contract with the employer if you feel like you need help with that, which I feel like we are all baseline not a good negotiators. we're just, oh, we got our J1 waiver position. Yay, that's great. We'll do everything. We'll just die to get this position. But also going back to Dr. Gupta, when she mentioned, again, you don't want to end up in a toxic environment because you're going to be there for 3 years. And if it's a toxic environment, they won't let you out even after 3 years. So it's very important you go visit the program, you meet with the people, you spend time with in the community, you go look at the schools, you meet with their immigration lawyer, you meet with their nursing managers, OB folks, and kind of people that are kind of stakeholders in our work. So it's very important to get that feel to be in a right place and not end up in a toxic place.
Awesome advice. Thanks, everybody. One question that somebody asked is maybe a little bit difficult in this time due to some changes in our political climate and concern about academic institutions losing funds, with concern about potential job freezes. Has anybody heard about people successfully taking 2 years and going back to their home country and then, potentially coming back to get work on a green card? Or, is that a possibility? Ask somebody, or is that something that, not people are not doing very often? Does anybody have any opinions on that?
I mean, I would say that one, you have to just really be looking at the recent and stay now
We're losing you, Dr. Gupta.
I never got was
So your voice is cutting out.
sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah, no,
better.
good.
Okay. Sorry. I was just saying that you just have to kind of really stay updated with the current news, and staying on top of it. In terms of people going home and coming back, I do know people who have done that, and it worked out for them. If you keep your connections and you're a good network, you're good at networking and you are still publishing with them or something like that, people definitely have done that. 2 years is not a very long time in the long run, and people do understand why you had to do that. But most of us, build our lives here already, and it's not that easy. It's not an easy choice. You have somewhere along the line, you have your children who might be US citizens and want to stay here. So it's a whole process. It's not just about you relocating and coming back.
So as Dr. Gupta mentioned, there are two aspects to look at it. Do you have to go back to your parent country because A, you are not able to get the job, or B, because of your visa requirement? Personally, I have yet to come across somebody who is not able to get the job in the US. We are not talking about a specific job. We are talking about a job as a neonatologist, and not because they are not able to get the job, they have to go back to their parent country to finish the 2 years waiver. I have yet to come across a single neonatologist like that. I have met so many other subspecialties in the pediatric group who has to do that, but not in a neo. So that answers the first part. The second part is, if you're going just to complete your waiver part, then what Dr. Gupta mentioned is 100% true, is that if you have a good connections and if they have a need, definitely once you come back, the job would be there waiting for you. So the question is, are you able to maintain the connection? And do they also think that they will still need a job after 2 years where they can rely on your clinical skills after 2 years? They'll hire you. So I think in that context, it's relatively easier for somebody to think about, can I get the job back when I go back there or not?
Yeah, and the freezes are there, but for the most part, from what I know, clinical need is always there for neonatologists. And, whatever is going on with the administration, that really does not change. And so jobs for neonatologists generally are there.
And you don't even
Right.
probably have to do a full 2 years, because you can make the vacations, like all the travels that you did to your home country, starting from the first time you got your J1 count for that requirement too. So maybe like it might end up coming to 1.5 years. might not be a long time in the general or like overall timeline of our careers.
So you should try to travel outside the country rather than exploring United States when you're a trainee, and try, this way it can help you in the long run.
Right. I was gonna say, no matter who the president is, babies will still be born. And more so, there were more babies born in COVID pandemic than any other time, I feel like. So job security is really good in neonatology.
I think part of the reason we don't know, but the way the media is projecting, and also what I read is that they are excluding the healthcare and the retirement funding. So if that is true, then pretty much they are not trying to unsponsor or not provide the funding to the healthcare institution. If that holds true, then Medicare and Medicaid funding will not be affected, at least in the short run. And that's how pretty much majority of the job is being sponsored. And in that context, I don't think so far in a near term, we are looking at this changing political landscape would make an effect on somebody looking for a job, or they would withdraw the job. They might not post a new job because the employer themselves is wary about that. But in general, I don't think that is coming because of the federal funding as of now, what we see.
And I also believe that with the changes in the administration and the whole focus on the immigration side of it, I don't think the physicians will be affected that much, but because of the change in the environment, definitely kind of timelines are looking at being longer than usual. So if you're applying for a visa, it might take longer. The dates for visa interview might take longer to be available in your home country or wherever you're going. So traveling during this time, I'm trying not to travel to my home country right now, and just because I don't know, but people get kind of a little bit more scrutinized during these environments, and I just don't want to kind of go through that. So not like eventual, like final working and getting the visa eventually, but the timelines can look longer during this time for sure.
One question I have in a similar path is that I'm worried, will institutions be more reserved in hiring people who will need a visa, a waiver? Because this is a general question for them too, if things will work out or not.
Well, if they have a need and if they don't have no one else to work, I mean, what the option they have? They will like still kind of go for it. Now it's the luck of the applicant, you know.
I think if you look at it overall, there is a financially payout difference in the context of whether we talk about the J1 waiver places or we talk about the medically underserved area compared to those places which doesn't fall in. And I think because of that, a little the salary difference, what or benefit difference, what you consider, my assumption is that the employers are finding it also very hard to have a new employee joining in their group if they don't have any needs or requirements. And if that holds true, then no matter what kind of political landscape is, what kind of changes they are trying to bring it in, they still need to run certain kind of institutions at a certain level. And in order for them to do that, they still need to hire. So yes, if you are looking at that, if you are not a good negotiator, if you are not able to, you might see some hit in your paycheck a little bit, but that's not going to be at the cost of you are not able to get the job. It's more about A, you did not negotiate well, B, you did not find the right place, and C, you just went in with a little bit of research and that's why you are getting the hit. But job will be still there.
Well, thank you guys so much. I did have one question just pop up, if you wouldn't mind. I think we've talked a lot about some different options, and I think it's hard for us to know the likelihood of being successful. This person specifically wanted to know with experience with the Conrad 30, and if do we think that it's better to try that route versus some others? I don't know if anybody has some opinions on that. I think that's a really difficult question to answer. But I think that I think it's difficult because the Conrad does have such a limit, but it does allow you to work in maybe other states that you wouldn't be able to with others.
If you are wanting a sure shot answer and you are someone that likes to know that you're going to have a job and that you're going to be working on this day and you are a planner, then the other waivers are better for you because there will be a lot of anxiety and uncertainty as you go through the Conrad 30 process. But doing your homework is important. Like, Dr. Sunair mentioned, you have to go to each state's website, know their deadlines, know how many people in neonatology or whatever field you're in get the waiver and things like that. I had some fellows that were like really nitty-gritty and knew exactly the percentages and then said, no, thank you, I don't want to do this. I much rather just go the other route. So it really depends on your personal choice.
And unfortunately, I think each year is even different. For example, one year, New Jersey couldn't complete the 30 spots that they can sponsor for the waiver. So for a year, it just kept as a rolling application. But the next year, it got more than 30 applications, probably because thought it was such a safe state to apply to. And then many people couldn't get it that year.
Also, the states which does not have the federal program, because most of the federal programs are kind of concentrated and kind of South Central and Southeast and maybe Northeast. So there is not much in the Midwest and kind of on the West Coast. So Conrad, if you are really restricted to that geographical location, then Conrad may be the only option. But the states where you have other options, I think people are choosing to go those route more than the Conrad these days.
Do you guys know of people who've been successful through some of those like specific state ones? Somebody asked about the newer program in the Southeast. Does anybody have
That's the
know if
South.
people have been successful?
That's the Southeast Crescent waiver. Probably that's the newest one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do know people, and that's the easiest one these days, and very, very popular.
That's
And
what I heard as well, yeah.
And a lot of pediatrics jobs are linked to that one, and so it's actually a very smooth process for someone that's going through a pediatrics recruiter, like Dr. Singh mentioned, and then doing that particular waiver.
And I think that SCRC added the Florida or added the waiver program to Florida, the federal program to Florida. There are a lot of other states that are part of all these kind of waivers. I think Florida is the only one that is part of SCRC, and that's the only way you can get a waiver in Florida if you want to stay in Florida.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I don't want to take over too much more time because we're just about at the end, but does anybody have any last advice or opinion for people? Little highlights of what you'd suggest for future visa with the job search people?
Hang in there. It's a long process, but you get there eventually. And plan early, look at the deadlines.
And then I think making connections and asking questions and educating yourself on the process is very important. So you don't rely on the lawyers and your employer and kind of think, oh, they will do the right thing. I know my one of the old colleagues, her waiver was actually rejected, and it was purely at the fault of the immigration lawyer. And I'm going to stay away from that immigration lawyer.
Start early, know your stuff, and just hang in there. And you will see the light at the end of the tunnel. You will get a job. You might not get the best perfect job what you're wishing for, but at least you'll get 80-90% of what you're looking for in a job. And I think as soon as you know that, just make sure that you get your job signed in.
I would also like to mention that although the process is kind of very stressful, still enjoy your life, enjoy your family, enjoy your work, and just be happy.
Yeah, that is extremely important. For me, this process was really long and I traveled a lot. I actually traveled internationally all the time, making sure that all of my paperwork was squared away, but that does not mean that I was going to stop my life or was going to be scared. Both me and my husband and the kids did that. When we reached a point where we couldn't travel because our visa was not stamped at that point, and during COVID, consulates were closed. My children actually learned to travel alone, and they were teenagers, but we had family overseas, and we learned all the processes for airlines, how unaccompanied minors travel and things like that. So you have a lot of workarounds where you don't want to just sit at home scared. Then that brings a lot of anxiety.
All right, well, thank you, panelists. Thank you, speakers. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Please look out for an email to let you know when this is online on YouTube. And I believe that we have lots more to discuss and learn about visas and how we can help support our colleagues who are on visas and looking for jobs. So please reach out if you guys need anything. But thanks again, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you.